All right, so are you ready to dive into George Washington's presidency? You guys send over a ton of material, articles, historical accounts, even a clip from another history podcast.
Yeah.
It's 1789. Anxiety is all over the place. And Washington's not only got to build a government from scratch,
Right.
but also deal with wars, debt, and foreign policy issues.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a presidential to-do list.
It's amazing. What's really interesting is how these sources show the person behind all the legends.
Yeah.
Washington was setting precedents, right? Like he was creating a role that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Imagine defining the presidency
Yeah.
for a country that's never had one.
I know. It's a lot of pressure.
Huge.
So we're going to go deeper than just, the textbook version of Washington.
Of course.
How did his experiences shape his vision for the country? How did he deal with, the big issue of slavery?
Right.
And what were those defining moments that still kind of echo in America today?
That's the question, isn't it? How much does the past actually shape our present? As we go through these sources, think about how Washington's presidency is reflected in modern America.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's rewind the clock to April 30th, 1789.
Yeah.
Picture this. New York City church bells are ringing, cannons are firing, everyone's dressed up, heading to Federal Hall for the big event.
Oh, wow.
What a scene.
The energy must have been incredible, like a mix of hope and uncertainty and this huge weight of history all at once.
Yeah, it was like a celebration, but also kind of scary, right?
Definitely.
One source describes Washington showing up in just a plain brown suit. No fancy robes or crowns for this guy.
Wow.
Takes the oath on a balcony overlooking the crowd, and bam, America's got its first president.
That detail about the suit, it's really important. It shows how Washington wanted to distance himself from monarchy. He's setting the tone for a presidency based on Republican ideals.
Right. It's like he's saying we're doing things our own way here. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even before becoming president, Washington faced a bunch of challenges at the Constitutional Convention. Can you imagine that room full of strong personalities and different ideas for the nation?
And we can't forget the historical context. This is right after the Revolution. The Articles of Confederation failed,
Right.
So they needed a stronger national government.
Right.
But there was also this fear of becoming like the monarchy they had just fought to get rid of.
Oh, I see a delicate balance.
It's very much so.
Our sources talk about Washington's leadership style at the convention. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He used this quiet power, hosting dinners and informal gatherings to get people on the same page.
That's classic Washington. He understood how important relationships were and how to find common ground. This is a skill that will be super helpful during his presidency.
For sure. And speaking of becoming president, our sources mention that Washington didn't really campaign the way we think of it today.
Right.
Back then, it was seen as not proper to openly seek power.
Yeah, you let other people do the promoting for you.
Yeah. Wow, so different from today's politics.
Totally. No attack ads, no Twitter wars, just quiet backroom deals and whispers of Washington for president.
Can you imagine?
It says a lot about the values and expectations of leadership back then.
It really does, but beneath that calm surface, there was a lot of anxiety. A fragile economy, threats from other countries, and divisions within the country itself. It was a tough situation.
One source even describes the national mood as anxious and uncertain.
Ah.
It makes you wonder if people really believed this new government would work.
Did they think it could survive?
Right.
That anxiety fueled some of the biggest debates during Washington's presidency, like the whole controversy around the National Bank, Hamilton versus Jefferson. Talk about a financial showdown.
It shows those early political divisions and how they reflected broader arguments about the role of government.
Right.
Even in a brand new nation, people had different ideas about power and the relationship between the government and the people.
Makes sense. So Hamilton, a strong Federalist, wanted a powerful central government and saw the national bank as key to stabilizing the economy.
But Jefferson wasn't so sure. He was worried about giving too much power to the elite and thought the bank would lead to corruption and market manipulation.
It's almost like a preview of the political battles that would keep happening throughout American history, right? This back and forth between government involvement and hands-off approach.
Exactly, and it connects to your interest in different perspectives.
Yeah.
We're still dealing with these questions today, the role of government and economic policy. They're debates that never really go away.
Okay, so let's talk about the big issue that hangs over Washington's legacy, slavery. Our sources handled this topic very carefully.
Yeah, we have to remember that Washington was a man of his time, a Virginia planter who inherited enslaved people. When he married Martha, it was the system he was born into.
And you know what's crazy? Martha's first husband's plantation was actually called the White House.
Oh, wow, the irony.
Oh.
It shows how deeply embedded slavery was in American society. Even the symbol of presidential power is connected to this terrible institution.
It's heavy stuff, but our sources point out that Washington's views on slavery did change, especially after the Revolution.
Yeah, he started to see the contradiction between the ideals of freedom and the reality of enslaving people.
His letters to Lafayette, who was a strong abolitionist, give us a glimpse into his changing thoughts. You can see him struggling with the morality of slavery, looking for a way out.
Right. And he did take some steps like integrating the Continental Army, allowing black soldiers to fight for freedom. That was a big deal, considering the racial prejudice at the time.
It suggests maybe Washington's commitment to freedom went beyond just his own interests.
Perhaps he genuinely wanted change.
But then, as president, he signs the Fugitive Slave Act.
Right.
And he avoids pushing for abolition because he's afraid it'll break apart the fragile nation.
It reminds us that even people who see injustice can be limited by the politics of their era, the fear of division, the need for unity. Those things can sometimes outweigh what's morally right.
It's hard to accept, isn't it? You see these signs of a changing conscience, but they're often hidden by political reality.
Yeah, that tension between personal beliefs and political strategy, it's something leaders still face today. It shows that progress, especially moral progress, is rarely simple or straightforward.
Definitely not. And here's something I found really interesting in his will. Washington makes a radical decision.
Oh.
He frees the people he enslaved after Martha dies.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
It suggests he was becoming more and more uncomfortable with slavery, maybe even wanting to make up for his own role in the system.
Yeah, but there's a twist. It was mostly kept quiet at the time. The full impact of his decision was hidden by other stories that focused on his more, agreeable qualities.
Which raises a question. Did Washington want to be remembered as someone who opposed slavery, or was he okay with a more sanitized version of history?
It's almost like we're still uncovering the complete story of Washington and slavery.
Right.
It reminds us that history is rarely simple. It's full of contradictions and complexities that we're still trying to understand today.
That's what makes a deep dive like this so interesting. We're not just repeating facts. We're engaging with the messy parts of history, trying to understand the people and forces that shaped our nation.
Okay, speaking of messy, let's talk about foreign affairs. The French Revolution throws a big curveball into Washington's presidency, forcing him to deal with a tricky international situation.
We have to remember that the French had supported the American colonies during their revolution.
Right.
Now they're going through their own upheaval, and there's a lot of pressure on Washington to choose a side.
On one hand, you have this feeling of obligation. America owes the French something, and those revolutionary ideals and liberty, equality, fraternity, they resonated with a lot of Americans.
But on the other hand, America was still a new and weak country. Getting involved in a European war could have been disastrous.
So Washington makes the practical but unpopular choice. He declares neutrality.
It really highlights his commitment to putting America's interests first, even if it meant disappointing allies and facing criticism at home.
But then things get even more complicated when the French send their ambassador Edmond Genet to try and get support for their cause.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy goes off script. He tries to go around Washington appealing directly to the American people to back France.
How bold. It was a clear attempt to interfere in American politics, and Washington was furious.
It's almost like a foreshadowing of our worries today about foreign interference in elections. These outside forces using our internal divisions to get what they want. It's a story that keeps repeating itself.
And this incident just made the partisan conflicts that Washington was trying so hard to control even worse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The French Revolution became this focal point for the already growing tension between the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Republicans.
Right. Jefferson initially sympathized with the French. He saw their revolution as a continuation of the American fight for freedom.
But even he eventually admitted that Genet went too far, that his actions were a threat to America's stability.
It's a good reminder that even within political groups, there can be disagreements about how to balance ideology with practical considerations.
And Washington, caught in the middle, hated this new party system. He saw it as a danger to unity and reasoned decision-making.
He really believed that political parties were all about self-interest and corruption, and that they prevented the kind of thoughtful debate that a healthy democracy needs.
He even tried to get Hamilton and Jefferson to compromise to find some common ground, but their differences were too strong, reflecting fundamental disagreements about the future of the nation.
And these disagreements weren't limited to the government. The growing press was becoming more and more partisan, which made the divide even bigger.
And Washington found this really disturbing. He was very outspoken about his concerns about the rise of an opposition press. He saw it as a source of division and false information.
It's interesting how those early worries about the media are similar to our concerns today about its influence on public opinion and political discussion.
History repeating itself again, right?
It seems like it.
We're still grappling with those same questions about the power of the media, the balance between a free press and a responsible one.
And in this context, Washington's presidency becomes a case study in navigating the challenges of a new democracy, that constant struggle to balance individual freedoms with a need for order and stability. It's a theme that runs throughout his time in office.
Let's switch gears now and talk about Washington's relationship with Native American tribes. Our sources paint a complex picture highlighting the contradictions and tensions of that time.
On one hand, Washington had firsthand experience interacting with Native American tribes. He fought alongside them against them.
Right.
He understood the diversity of their cultures, their claims to the land.
He even advocated for recognizing Native American nations as sovereign entities, making treaties and trying to keep things peaceful.
But on the other hand, he was also a big believer in westward expansion. He saw access to land as critical for America's economic success, and he wasn't afraid to use military force to get that access.
And we can't forget his time before becoming president when he was involved in land speculation. He profited from acquiring land that rightfully belonged to Native American tribes.
It's a stark reminder that even those who express sympathy for Native Americans can still participate in systems that take away their land and rights.
It's a sad pattern that unfortunately keeps repeating itself throughout American history. Those early contradictions in Washington's approach set the stage for centuries of broken treaties and forced removals.
And it's important to understand that these actions weren't just driven by greed. There was also this widespread belief that Native Americans were obstacles to progress, uncivilized savages who needed to be assimilated or removed.
A dehumanizing perspective that was used to justify violence and exploitation. It's a dark chapter in our history that we absolutely need to confront and acknowledge.
Yes, Mike.
And as we look closer at Washington's presidency, we see how these conflicting impulses play out in his policies and actions.
You're right.
By the end of his first term, Washington was worn out.
Understandably.
He was ready to retire to Mount Vernon and just relax. But as they say, fate had other plans.
The nation was deeply divided. Partisan tensions were high, and there was a growing fear that the country might fall apart.
His advisors, Hamilton, Madison, they all urged him to stay on for a second term. They saw him as the only one who could hold the country together.
It really shows how much people trusted and respected him. Washington was more than just a president. He was a symbol of unity, someone who transcended those partisan divides.
And reluctantly he agreed, putting his personal desires aside for the good of the nation.
That's a true testament to his sense of duty, his unwavering commitment to the American experiment.
But even as he started the second term, he knew he couldn't stay in power forever. He began writing his farewell address, a document that would become a cornerstone of American political thought.
It's more than just a goodbye message. It's a collection of his wisdom, his insights into leadership, and the challenges facing a young republic.
It's a warning about the dangers of partisanship, a plea for unity, and a call for a practical foreign policy.
A document that's still debated and analyzed today. It's amazing how relevant it remains and how much insight it offers into the challenges of American democracy.
One of the most famous lines from that address is his warning against permanent alliances, an idea that has shaped American foreign policy for centuries.
It reflects Washington's belief that America should make its own decisions and avoid getting tangled up in the conflicts of other countries.
Of course, this idea has been debated and reinterpreted over time as America's role in the world has changed.
But it's a testament to Washington's foresight that his words are still part of our understanding of America's place in the world.
As we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I'm struck by how many challenges Washington faced building a new government dealing with crises at home and abroad. It's an incredible story.
It's easy to see him as this stoic, almost mythical figure, but our sources reveal a much more complex and human person.
He was a man of contradictions, capable of great wisdom and great flaws.
He's a product of his time, but also a visionary who helped shape the course of American history.
And his legacy continues to inspire and spark debate, making us confront the complexities of our past and the challenges of our present.
What's truly amazing is that despite all those obstacles, Washington managed to create a working government and set precedents that would guide the nation for centuries.
And that brings us to the end of part one of our deep dive. When we return, we'll take a closer look at those precedents, exploring how Washington's actions shaped the office of the presidency and the course of American history.
Looking forward to it. It's amazing how we can get caught up in like the big picture of history,
Yeah.
but these sources really make Washington feel real.
Yeah.
They show his struggles, his doubts, even times when he was frustrated. It makes you realize he was human just like us.
Totally. It's like we're getting a behind-the-scenes look at the man, not just the monument. And speaking of monuments, our sources also talk about how Washington's image has been shaped and reshaped over time.
Right, like those early portraits that show him as this almost godlike figure ascending to heaven.
Yeah.
It was a deliberate attempt to make him a symbol of national unity and virtue.
It's like they're saying, look at this perfect leader who brought us freedom. But as we've seen, Washington wasn't perfect. He was a man of his time dealing with tough issues and making difficult choices.
Exactly. And as our understanding of history changes, so does our view of Washington. We're more willing now to acknowledge his flaws, his involvement in things like slavery, while still recognizing his contributions to the nation. It's all about finding that balance.
Right. It's like we're moving past blind hero worship and toward a more nuanced and honest appreciation of his legacy.
I think that's a great way to put it. And that shift in perspective helps us engage with his presidency in a more meaningful way. We can learn from his mistakes as well as his successes.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those precedents that Washington set during his presidency that still influence the office today.
One of the most important ones is the idea of presidential restraint. Washington understood how dangerous it could be if the president had too much power. He was cautious about concentrating too much authority in one person.
Well, I mean, he had just fought a revolution to overthrow a king, right? He wasn't about to become one himself.
Exactly. So he purposefully tried to limit his own power, letting Congress handle key issues and establishing a model of humility for the presidency.
That's interesting. He also set the standard for a two-term presidency, even though there wasn't a rule about it back then. He chose to step down after 8 years, showing that the presidency wasn't meant to be a lifetime job.
That was a crucial decision for making sure there was a peaceful transfer of power, which is a fundamental part of American democracy.
Can you imagine if he had tried to stay in power? It could have set a very different example, one that might have weakened the whole idea of a republic.
Absolutely. And Washington's focus on unity and avoiding partisanship also had a lasting impact on the presidency. He saw political factions as a threat to the nation's stability and actively discouraged them from forming.
Of course, he wasn't completely successful in that. The seeds of partisanship were already planted, and they would grow into full-fledged political parties soon after he left office.
True, but his warnings about the dangers of division are still important today, especially with how divided things are politically right now.
It's like he's talking to us from the past, urging us to find common ground and put the country's needs ahead of our own political interests.
I like that. And another important part of Washington's presidency was his focus on creating a strong financial system. He knew that a stable economy was crucial for the new nation to survive.
And that's where Alexander Hamilton comes in, the financial genius who pushed for the creation of the national bank and a system of national debt.
Hamilton's vision was controversial, as we talked about earlier, but it ultimately created the foundation for America's economic growth and its rise as a global power.
And the fact that Washington supported Hamilton's plan, even though some people in his own cabinet disagreed, shows his commitment to finding practical solutions, even when they were politically risky.
It's a good reminder that being an effective leader often means making tough choices, even if it upsets your allies or leads to criticism.
Washington wasn't just focused on domestic issues, though. He also played a key role in shaping America's foreign policy.
Right. His decision to remain neutral during the French Revolution set a precedent for America not getting involved in other countries' conflicts, an idea that would guide the nation's foreign policy for a long time.
He knew that America was still young and vulnerable and needed to avoid getting dragged into European wars.
And his farewell address stressed this point even more, warning against permanent alliances and encouraging America to find its own way in the world.
Of course, that idea has been debated and reinterpreted over time as America's role on the global stage has grown.
But it shows how forward-thinking Washington was, that his words still influence how we think about America's place in the world today.
It's amazing to think about how much he achieved in such a short time, creating a new government, establishing a stable financial system, and setting precedents that still guide us today.
And he did all of this while dealing with some incredibly tough challenges: a weak economy, threats from other countries, and deep political divisions.
It's a powerful lesson in leadership. It's not about having power, but using it wisely and thoughtfully. It's about making hard choices, building consensus and putting the nation's interests ahead of personal ambition.
It really makes you think about what it means to be a leader, doesn't
Yeah, it
it?
really does. And I'm even more curious to hear your thoughts on Washington's legacy. What are your takeaways? This whole idea of leadership that we've been talking about,
Yeah.
it's really interesting to me because it seems like Washington's legacy is still so hotly debated today.
Hmm.
It's like he's this puzzle that historians and politicians are always trying to figure out,
Right.
fitting him into their own stories and agendas.
Right. It's like everyone wants a piece of Washington. They want to claim him as their own.
Right. They need his approval to make their own beliefs and values seem legitimate.
Exactly.
But that's why it's so important to look at things from multiple perspectives. Like you were saying,
Yeah.
we can't just accept one interpretation of Washington. We have to really grapple with the complexities of his life and legacy, don't we?
I think that's crucial. It's about recognizing both the good and the bad, the triumphs and the failures,
Right.
and understanding how they all come together to paint the whole picture.
Seeing the complete person, flaws and all, it's a much more honest approach, wouldn't you say?
Definitely, I agree. It's about recognizing his accomplishments while also acknowledging his role in things like slavery. He
Yeah.
was a product of his time, but he also helped shape the course of American history. It's a complicated legacy, to say the least.
So how should we remember George Washington today? Is it more important to focus on what he achieved or to acknowledge his flaws and the contradictions of the era he lived in?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. I think it's about striking a balance between admiration and critical thinking.
Appreciating his successes, but also being honest about the full context of his life and the decisions he made.
Exactly. And using his story to start conversations about the challenges America faces today.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Like, how do we live up to those ideals of liberty and equality that Washington talked about, while also recognizing the ways we haven't quite gotten there yet?
How do we reconcile the contradictions of our past with our hopes for the future? Those are some really tough questions to think about.
They are, but they're questions we need to ask if we want to understand our nation's history and build a more just and fair future.
It makes me wonder if Washington himself would have been okay with these kinds of difficult conversations.
You know, I think he might have.
Hmm.
He valued reasoned debate and critical thinking.
Yeah.
He understood that democracy is always evolving. It's a process of constantly learning and adapting.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
Okay.
What lessons can we learn from Washington's presidency that can help us navigate the challenges America faces in the 21st century?
How can we apply his wisdom, his principles, his commitment to unity, and finding practical solutions to the complex issues of our time?
Right.
It's not about just copying everything he did,
Yeah.
but about understanding the core values that guided his leadership.
It's a challenge that requires us to engage with the past to understand its complexities
Yeah.
and use it as a roadmap for building a better future.
That's the power of history. It's not just about memorizing names and dates. It's about understanding who we are, where we came from, and where we're headed. It shapes our present and our future.
So to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper. There's always more to learn, more to uncover about this amazing nation and its founders.
And remember, even the most revered figures in our history were human. They made mistakes, faced challenges, struggled with tough choices.
By understanding their struggles, we can better understand our own and find inspiration and guidance for navigating the complexities of our own time.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the presidency of George Washington.
It's been a pleasure exploring these sources with you.
And to our listeners, until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, keep diving deep.